Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys in a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
This week, well, sadly, we are doing another tribute episode. Not sadly that we're doing the episode, just sadly that another one of the world's talents has passed on. I think it was about a month or two ago. No, maybe a little more than that. Shelly Duvall passed away. So we obviously had only one choice.
Right.
You know, there's only one obvious choice here. And
I texted you.
Yeah.
I texted you and said, Shelly Duvall died. You know what that means. And you just wrote back, yup.
That's right. It is 1980s The Shining, one of the most notorious horror films of the modern age. And you know, we would only do it for this because, diving into this feels intimidating, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Not that we can't talk about The Shining for hours, but that's the problem.
Of course.
We could talk about it for hours, and we probably wouldn't say much that hasn't already been said.
Because so much has been said. I mean, there are documentaries about it. There are all kinds of, conspiracy theories about it. Like, if you wanted to do a deep dive, you could find
better shit than what we're about to say.
Millions of articles, full-length documentary films, all kinds of things. There's just so much. And for good reason. I think it's an amazing movie, so I understand why people talk about it so much. But again, you're right. The reason that we haven't touched it is the same reason that we don't touch a lot of these classics is, what are we going to say that hasn't already been said? That being said, I am fully 100% prepared to gush about Shelly Duvall. So
we are.
I'm ready to go.
We are. Yeah. But you know what? I'll tell you, just kind of like also when we did Cannibal Holocaust and like when we did more recently The Last House on the Left, I don't feel obligated to gush over this movie. I am so familiar with this movie. I've seen it so many times that I really tried to come at it this time around like I'd never seen it before. I mean, it's hard to do, but I sort of tried to put myself in the mindset of, I don't want to feel obligated. I don't want to feel pressured to talk about how wonderful this movie is simply because everybody thinks this movie is wonderful.
Not everybody.
Not
Stephen King.
Probably, yeah. The first is Stephen King, although even Stephen King's come around
a little bit
on it. Well, what's hilarious about it is you've read the book, right? You've read the book.
Yes.
I have too. I think the book is awesome. The book is amazing.
Yes.
And Stephen King is right. The book bears, 50% of a resemblance to the movie. There's a lot of iconic, almost everything that is iconic about this film is not in the book.
Yeah.
The blood coming out of the elevators, the naked woman in the bathtub, the hedge maze.
Right, the girls.
A lot of the stuff that's central to the book is almost completely missing from the movie.
I think that's a really good place to start because I read the book too, and I only read it once and I was in high school, but it to date is the only book that really scared me.
Really?
Yeah, I love reading horror and
you read a ton of horror.
Yeah, I do, but I've never felt scared when reading a book, and I felt scared reading The Shining. Again, random Friends reference, but like in Friends, Joey, it's The Shining is his favorite book, but he has to keep it in the freezer because it's too scary.
That is hilarious.
And I get that. The movie is quite different in a multitude of ways. This is one of those instances where I just think they're both great on their own merit. I love the book. I love the movie. Yes, they are quite different. I do think, even though Stephen King doesn't really, I don't think he much cares about his film adaptations, or at least that's what I've read. Like, he's not losing sleep over it.
Right.
I think that the reason that this one, it bothered him that it was so different is because the novel, the story, is largely about a man's struggle with the demon that is alcoholism, which was Stephen King's own struggle. He had problems with both drugs and alcohol. He's clean now. And there's an element of that in the movie, but in the book, it's very much a story,
it's about that, really. I mean...
it's very much about that. And the hotel, which literally is like an entity, exploits Jack's alcoholism to manipulate him and eventually control him. And the book is much more of a gradual decline into Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that King didn't like about this was that Jack Torrance, the character played by Jack Nicholson, seems like a lunatic from the beginning. Yeah. And I don't disagree.
I don't either. It's true.
He seems crazy from the beginning. And Jack Nicholson has an amazing look, but he exploits his face. Like, he just looks crazy. And the camera lingers on him so much and just lingers on him staring and scowling. And I get it. I understand King's criticism. I don't disagree. It doesn't make me not like the movie, but if I had the same kind of personal connection to it that he did, I can understand why he doesn't like it.
Number one, of course, very personal book for him. On that point, we've seen some movies where we were talking about this very thing. The one that springs to mind immediately is Amityville 2, where, I think when we talked about that, we said this family moved in here with problems.
Right.
This wasn't just a happy, loving, wonderful family with no issues, and then the house turned them evil. The house, made their problems 10 times worse. Amplified them, and that's fair. I think that's good horror as well.
I do too.
It's maybe even more I don't want to say authentic. There's no authentic horror, right? But like it at least is a kind of more believable story that I didn't just suddenly turn bad because I spent a couple nights in a haunted house. It's that the haunted house took what was my weaknesses and turned them against me
and exploited it.
That's and so yes. I don't hate that either about this movie. And then I think you can even make a case for Kubrick kind of included it anyway, because it doesn't dwell on his alcoholism and his kind of falling off the wagon. Really, in the movie, it depends on how you interpret it, he still probably never has a drink, maybe. But the movie does, in fact, include a lot of references to the fact that he was not sober before. He is supposedly clean now. He injured Danny, when he came home drunk one night.
Yeah, and all that's in the book.
It's in the book, and so, it's still in the movie. And then, of course, there's that almost what you would consider a turning point in the film where he has the conversation with, I'll just say, a ghost, bartender, and takes his drink, and from that point on, nothing is quite the same. That's almost like the turning point for him to spiral deeper into this madness. But it's just not to the same degree as it is in the book. And so obviously, King is pissed off about it. I get that.
And again, like, just listening to you talk for the last 30 seconds, you said like 10 things that I want to talk about. And I don't know how much we're going to be able to, but like you said, he talks to, for lack of a better word, a ghost. And I think that is very much the way that the movie presents it. The movie is like about a haunted hotel.
Yes.
The book felt more like there is some entity that is, it wasn't just ghosts. There were ghosts, but those ghosts were there because whatever that force was, whatever that entity that was there in the hotel that then goes on to directly speak to and influence Jack. In fact, in the book, it's very, very much, I don't even want to say suggested. It's not subtext, it's text that the hotel brings him there.
Yeah.
It knows that it can manipulate him for its own uses before he's even there.
Yeah,
it's crazy. So there are so many things like that are interesting that I want to talk about. I also just want to get it right out of the way that I think that Jack Nicholson is brilliant in this movie.
Yeah.
He is so scary. I do think that he seems crazy from the beginning, but he's really scary. But watching this movie again, and I have seen it so many times, but I honestly couldn't tell you the last time that I sat down and watched it from start to finish. And that is a whole other experience.
It's a commitment, too. It's a 2.5 hour film, so. It
doesn't feel long. Didn't feel long to me at all.
No, it doesn't. It moves, but it's not full of action.
Even more so, right. Even more so than moving, I just feel that it's stunning to look at. Like every frame feels intentional. And maybe it is. Kubrick
is well known for that.
Yeah, that's what he's known for. He's known for that visual style, among other things. But what I wanted to get at is watching it again, and I'm sure it has to do with the frame of mind that I had going into it. This is Shelley Duvall's movie.
Yes.
And this movie, the book is about Jack. The movie is about Wendy.
Yeah.
And I think her performance in this, and my God, talking about what went into it, and all of the behind the scenes things that were going on, obviously we will talk about. Mm-hmm. But just out of the gate, I think she is so compelling. I think that she is so sympathetic. And this was another, King didn't like her casting either. In the book, she's like a busty blonde who's stunningly gorgeous, and he envisioned her as like a high school cheerleader type who has never really had to face any kind of real problems in the world because she's gorgeous and bubbly and everybody likes her. Mm-hmm. And Kubrick wanted to give Wendy more of a vulnerability, and I think that he was absolutely right. I love Wendy in this movie.
That translates visually much better to the screen, honestly, when you can have this person who just kind of feels vulnerable from the get-go. Because Shelley Duvall, by the way, is a unique person with a very, very interesting and great career. I was shocked to discover for the first time that she didn't study acting in school. She was artistic, and apparently she was very bubbly and well-liked and popular and was into a lot of different things. But like, she was working in a department store, and I think she went to college as a dietitian or something like that.
Something like that.
When she just happened upon Robert Altman at a party while he was shooting Brewster McCloud. And it was the cast and crew of the shoot told him, dude, you got to get this woman in your movie. She's just got something about her. She just has a charm and a personality, and she has a unique look, And he said they kind of strong-armed him into putting her in the movie, and then of course he's glad that they did, because he ended up putting her in a lot more movies.
And they just flew her out from Texas. Like, the girl was plucked from a party, and a filmmaker says, I want you in my movie. Okay. And then she just flies out to Los Angeles, and she does this movie, and she does other movies with him, and I get it. I'm just looking at her tiny little picture on IMDb right now, but she's striking. She looks like a model. She's very thin, almost frail, and she has huge eyes. Ironically, the same year that this came out, Popeye came out, the live-action Popeye movie, and she played Olive Oyl, which...
Who else could play Olive Oyl?
I know! She is her!
She's Olive Oyl. Yeah, this happy-go-lucky, super tall, skinny, like...
And I haven't seen that movie since I was a kid, but I remember loving it when I was a kid, and her playing against Robin Williams. And ironically, she had been teased as a child, being called Olive Oyl because she's gangly like the character, but she just personified it. In this, the reason that I say that it's about her and that it's her movie is that I feel now, watching this movie, this is a movie about a woman who is struggling desperately to keep her family together. It's a woman who has seen her husband at a really, really low point, but she loves him and she's optimistic that she won't see him there again. And then it just gets even worse. And it's a 2.5 hour long movie. The last hour at least, she is frantic and crying and panicking in every shot.
Yeah.
And she talks about how emotionally exhausting it was, but it reads on the screen like I am just terrified for her, and I feel so horrible for her.
It does. And another thing I'd really like to get out of the way is that this movie is so notorious. It has been mythologized so much. And Kubrick, is a kind of a mythical figure as well in the film community, that there's been a lot of bullshit, quite frankly, that has been talked about as far as behind the scenes and stuff like that. There's all kinds of stuff that's not quite true, rumors about how she was treated and stuff on the set. The reality appears to be that, yes, Kubrick did intentionally isolate her from the cast
and crew
and treated her more coldly than he did other actors. Kubrick was not known to be a people person. He probably wasn't at all. According to who you talk to, they said he didn't understand people. He didn't like people.
I think that he was brilliant, but like many artistically brilliant people, I think he was also nuts.
Yeah.
Anybody that you read interviews who worked with him, they all gush about the opportunity to work with such a brilliant man, but they also concede that he's a lunatic.
Yeah.
Like,
a lunatic.
He's crazy.
Very difficult to work with, would insist on take after take after take, going up sometimes into the hundreds.
Yes.
Which is totally unnecessary. Come on. We can objectively say.
No, for a simple scene, to get a simple shot.
There's no way about it. The guy was out of his mind, but he made good stuff. But also, there seems to be this thing floating around out there that I think has been more or less been debunked by now, that this movie just broke her forever. That's not true. She went on to do great stuff after this. She had fairy tale theater on television. She was a producer of children's entertainment. She started a couple companies. She had many, many roles after this. This is one of her earlier roles. She was a successful actress, completely in her faculties.
Very successful.
She did struggle a little bit with mental illness a little bit later in life.
In her later life,
which,
right.
is a normal thing.
Yeah.
And also, even that was overplayed.
It was exploited. It was in 2000. It was in 2016. Dr. Phil, that guy.
Yeah.
Dr. Phil had her on his show, and she was clearly not in a good place. Such a beautiful woman. She really, had kind of deteriorated physically, and she didn't appear to be entirely lucid.
Yeah.
However, in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of outcry and a lot of criticism of
how she was portrayed.
Doctor. He's not even a doctor.
No.
F that guy.
Yeah, that guy's also a lunatic. Well, opportunist is that guy.
Yeah, and he exploited her, and he was successful in doing what he wanted to do. He got a lot of clicks, and there was a lot of talk about it. It was great publicity for his show, I'm sure. But I think that people criticized it because nobody wishes her ill. I think everybody just was so sad to see her in not the best place. But in the aftermath of that, she was contacted by other people, like journalists, who were concerned about her. There was one in particular who said, "I didn't want that to be our last look at Shelly Duvall." And so she spoke, with a couple of journalists in the aftermath, and she even did another film, which I haven't seen and know nothing about. But I read that this journalist who sought her out said that she seemed fine, that she was entirely lucid, and in fact had an amazing memory and could tell amazing stories about her life and her career, and that she remained very proud of her career, as she should.
And that established as well, going back to this movie in particular, she admitted, and Jack Nicholson backed her up. She said, "This was hard. I was treated difficult on the set. I was pulling my hair out." Apparently she presented Kubrick with clumps of hair after the shoot was over that had fallen out because of her stress. But she said, "I wouldn't want to do it again."
Right.
But I'm very grateful to having gone through that. It was a learning experience for me as an actress. I'm very proud to be in this movie. I'm proud of what we came up with. And in fact, Jack Nicholson and Shelly Duvall are a little, I don't want to say bitter, but they've been a little outspoken in that, look, what about us? Kubrick gets all the credit for this movie.
Yeah.
There was a cast and a crew that worked tirelessly on this thing, and this was the most difficult thing for the two of us that we've ever shot in our lives to date. Give us some credit for the brilliance of this film as well, and we should.
We definitely should, because it's a character-driven movie. I mean, we are intimately involved in the life of this small family. And I want to say, too, that Danny Lloyd, the little boy in the movie, who they auditioned 4,000 kids or something, and this kid got it and then didn't really even go on to do anything else. In fact, he didn't even know that he knew that he was in this movie. He knew that he was in The Shining, but he didn't even know it was a horror movie. And then, I guess when he was, I don't know, an adolescent, 12 or something, he was shown a very heavily edited version of it, which was the first time that he found out that it was a horror movie. And then he didn't even see the actual theatrical cut until he was like 17 or 18.
That's funny,
It's
right?
insane. But he's great. He seems like a real kid. I think it's great that it was a wise choice to cast an amateur, even though he wasn't the first choice. Kubrick wanted the young kid from Close Encounters, but his parents wouldn't let him do it. But Jack Nicholson, I think does. I think he gives an outstanding performance. It's just so interesting to read the behind-the-scenes things, because Kubrick, like you said, Nicholson has agreed. He has supported the story that, Kubrick was really tough on Shelly Duvall. In fact, he said, I have never seen another actress be put through that kind of thing. Like, that comes across to me as really high praise from Jack Nicholson.
Right.
Jack Nicholson is a cool, stoic guy.
And he's been in a million
For
things.
him to say something like that he's never witnessed another actress have to go through so much and work so hard for a role. And he's very complimentary of her performance. I think that speaks a lot. Oh, gosh. And then Scatman Carruthers is in it.
Apparently, he also was super frustrated. I think they made him do like a 40 or 50 takes of the one scene where he's talking to Danny about, The Shining and about how he sees that Danny has this ability. And at one point, he just broke into tears. And Nicholson had to
the man
come
was brought to tears. You guys, if you don't know who this guy is, Google him and take one look at his picture and imagine him being brought to tears.
It's crazy, right?
By a director.
He was a friend of Nicholson's who suggested him for the role. I didn't know that either.
I think they were in Cuckoo's Nest together.
Oh, that's right. I forgot he was in Cuckoo's Nest. What a great movie, too.
Yeah, I think he was one of the orderlies or something. I don't remember. But I read that, and I read that this grown man was brought to tears because, as we've already mentioned, Kubrick would sometimes film one scene over 100 times. I get it. I get perfectionism. I get wanting to get exactly the right shot, but come on.
No, that's insanity.
But what I was thinking was, if Scatman Carruthers was brought to tears by the tedious nature of these shoots, how on earth did this little boy, Danny Lloyd, deal with all of that? But I also read that Kubrick was very soft with him. They had a very
protective,
a good, friendly relationship. They would play, when they weren't shooting, they would play together and stuff. Like, so not that had the child not been in the movie, I would have suggested that Kubrick is a monster. I think he just has a certain method. Yeah. But hearing these stories about him treating this kid so well and ensuring that he was comfortable and all of that, I don't know. It's just so nuanced. There are so many interesting things.
Yeah. And that's just the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. To talk about the movie, like even just as it starts, and I hadn't seen it in so long, just the opening, I could talk about that opening sequence for an hour. Just these stunningly gorgeous aerial shots over mountains. I don't remember where they shot it. It's supposed to be Colorado.
It was shot in I can't remember exactly where. He had to do a couple different flyovers to get it right. At one point, I think he just more or less did it himself. I was surprised to learn that this movie was one of the first films, big films anyway, to use a Steadicam.
That's what I was just going to say. Like, the guy who invented the Steadicam
was on this movie.
Yeah, is on this movie and kind of tested it. And there were a couple of other movies that he was working on and working with it too, but yeah, that's nuts.
It really is.
It's such a...
And it's such a good use of it, too. I mean...
It's beautiful.
Because obviously I'm not old enough to have seen this in the theater for the first time. It probably played way better for an audience back then who maybe had not been exposed to this degree of smooth camera work that goes in places that it doesn't normally go.
It's incredibly smooth. It's beautiful. It's stunning. The nature, a pristine lake that's like glass reflecting the mountains and the beautiful blue sky, and just following their car through these mountains. It's stunning to look at, and the score is not only iconic, but so effective and nuanced. Of course, that that prominent theme is there. But there's also so much going on in the score. I would recommend, if you haven't seen this movie or you haven't seen it for a long time and you want to rewatch it, pop in some earbuds or pop on some really good headphones.
Yes.
Because there is so much going on in the score and in the audio that I don't know that I had ever noticed before. That opening thing, it's musical, but a lot of the instrumentation is in fact vocalization.
Yes.
And it's like, I can't do it. I can't describe it, but it's haunting.
It is. I was kind of shocked. Again, like you, maybe, this was the first time I had sat with earbuds in and really taken in the score. And I think I just didn't notice it before, because it's one of those movies, you don't, like you said, you don't necessarily sit down and like, I'm going to spend the next 2.5 hours watching The Shining. It might be on in the background, or you might catch it on TV, or you might pop it on.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it. I know what's going on. I'll just catch bits and pieces of it here and there. Yeah.
No, seeing this, man, I can only imagine what it was like seeing this in the theater for the first time, because if you're fully enveloped in this with that giant picture in front of you of these gorgeous landscapes, but that score really sets the tone. Because it is spooky. I mean, it's spooky from the beginning, even though all you're seeing is all this beautiful nature. And it also kind of made me think, did this also set the tone for horror movies where, it seems like how many horror movies do we watch where the first shot is this big aerial shot following a car driving down the lonely path to the cabin, It's great. And Kubrick never shot a horror movie before this. The one I think he did before this was Barry Lyndon, and I don't know if you've seen that. No. That is a boring-ass movie. Gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, boring as hell. I think that style of filmmaking that he had, this very grand cinematic, very much take your time with it, very much compose every shot perfectly and make it just look gorgeous on the screen. It lends to the horror of this movie. Mm-hmm. It's a movie that could be boring because it has long, lingering shots where very little is going on. But that, he's kind of, I don't know, he's just tweaking things just enough, and the score has a lot to do with it, that the place becomes a character. And because we have these long shots on the screen, I mean, I think later masters have sort of picked up on this. You can't help but your eyes just start wandering because very little else is happening. You're scanning the whole surroundings, and that in itself can be unsettling.
Yeah. In its design, it is just visually stunning. And it does something, I don't know how to articulate it, but I think that it's brilliant in that the movie feels both claustrophobic and expansive. This 3-person family is all alone in this hotel. Now, the hotel is enormous. It's huge. It's gorgeous. It's the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which still stands. You can go there, and it, from the exterior, looks
pretty much the same
as it did. But they're isolated entirely. Like they make it very clear that the only connection that they have to the outside world is via radio, and even at some point that goes away. And the hotel is huge, and the way that it's shot, you're always aware of how big it is. And I loved those scenes with Danny riding around in the halls and just turning corner after corner as though God, now I'm getting heady. It feels like the maze that is also on the exterior of the hotel. But then Jack Nicholson does all of his work in this enormous lobby that's stunningly beautiful. And then there's also an enormous ballroom where some of the action takes place. And I just can't imagine. Most of it, like the exteriors were shot on location, but the interiors were all stages, right?
They're all sound stages. And even as I was watching it, I could hardly believe it because you see these giant floor-to-ceiling windows and that sunlight coming through them. And then I read that set that you were talking about very literally caught fire because of the high-intensity lamps that were required outside those windows to recreate sunlight. And it's meticulously researched. Kubrick's team went to hotels all over the U.S. to get little bits and pieces, and he said it's really like an amalgamation of the things that they liked from a lot of different hotels. and the set then was constructed, and they shot for way longer than they intended to. It took them over a year to get this thing done, while like at least 2 or 3 other major productions were waiting in the wings to use the frickin' sound stages. One of whom was Steven Spielberg trying to shoot Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
and
those I read that those sound stages were all kind of on the same lot, but this movie used every available stage.
Yeah.
So there was not. And that because Kubrick wanted to shoot it in script order, that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working on a lot of sound stages.
You shoot what's convenient.
Yeah, you shoot all of the scenes in one location so you can knock those out and be done with it. But because he wanted to shoot it sequentially, all of these stages just had to be ready to go at the drop of a hat. It's crazy.
Yeah. Have you seen that documentary, Room 237? I think you mentioned it.
Yeah, I watched it last night.
I did too.
Just to be caught up for this.
I had to. And that is an amusing documentary. And God bless everyone. I think that this movie here is like, if you care enough about any work of art, you're just going to keep looking at it over and over again. You're going to rewatch the same movie. You're going to examine a painting intimately.
Yeah.
And the more you do, the more you're going to see.
Yeah.
And Kubrick makes it easy because, number one, this movie is super long and it doesn't have a lot in it. As far as action and stuff goes, you're not going to like analyze the Fast and the Furious and imagine that in the garage on that shelf, the things on there were arranged in a very particular intentional order because the director wanted. No, because the director just breezes right by it. Well, because Kubrick doesn't breeze by anything, and we spend all of our time in this same location revisiting all these rooms and everything over and over and over again, with very long shots that you're stuck in for a long time, you can't help but eventually start looking around in the background. And because the action is so slow and deliberate, there's nothing else to do. I mean, if the composition wasn't so well put together and it wasn't so gorgeous, we'd be accusing him of padding for time, I think. So, that's just the nature of this movie. And yes, Kubrick did a lot of research. And of course, he is known for meticulously putting everything in there for a reason. But people go a little overboard.
I was just going to say, watching that movie, it made me think these people, they're approaching this movie the way that English teachers like myself approach literature.
Yeah.
Like, we are taking every little detail and saying, what does it mean? What does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I would not turn people away from that documentary. I think that a lot of the things that they say and a lot of the speculations that they make are huge stretches.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not interesting.
No,
did Stanley Kubrick stage the moon landing? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. I kind of think you're crazy if you think so, but maybe because Danny is wearing an Apollo 11 rocket. Okay, maybe he staged the moon landing. I loved the theory.
The notion that he and a whole cast and crew of people spent all this time and all this money and all this energy on this years-long project, which is secretly, the whole purpose for it is for him to very subliminally
confess to his wife,
communicate to the world that he staged the moon landing. I just don't think you understand the business of film, and I don't think you really understand the artistic process. Let's just put it that way. Movies are collaborative. They require input from a lot of people, and sometimes something is just up on the shelf because it looks good.
Well, and so much of that documentary, and again, I was intrigued. I was watching it, I was intrigued by it, but so much of it is if you watch the movie frame by frame, which then they literally show us, they are literally showing us clips frame by frame, then you will see this. And okay, I have read that Kubrick was meticulous, so maybe there was a reason that Jack is reading a Playgirl magazine in the lobby of the hotel. I don't know. I would be more inclined to think that was just a props thing. Here's a magazine.
Well,
who cares? cares?
There's some madness where one person suggests that the movie is meant to be watched forward and backwards, and so they superimposed the movie forwards and backwards, and we're talking about all these interesting ways that
I wanted to do that.
Oh my God.
Because they show it. It's at the very end. It's at the very end of the documentary. But they say, for some reason, I don't know, that you should watch the movie forwards and backwards at the same time with both images superimposed over one another. And then they show some of it, and it was actually fascinating. I would do it. I would watch it. I would get some people together and like smoke a doobie and totally watch that because it looks trippy and fun.
I agree. I put it in the same vein as I don't know if you ever did the Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon lineup with Wizard of Oz.
Yep.
It's fun. And it is crazy, the coincidence of those things lining up. But the reality is that at the time, you'd have to get a print of this film and go through, oh my God, the insane level of work that would be required to compose an entire album of songs that lined up perfectly with The Wizard of Oz, just to keep it secret, hoping that somebody would stumble upon it years later so you could be like, ha ha, look what we did. No, it just doesn't happen. Similarly, you can't cut a movie like this either, and you just can't, Nobody does this.
I agree. But what that part of that documentary highlighted to me was how meticulous Kubrick was in setting up his shots.
Yes.
And framing his shots. They seem to oddly line up because he's meticulous in the way that he shoots things. Mm-hmm. And he's meticulous in keeping characters in the very center of the frame, but then also having things going on outside. He's meticulous about everything. I mean, it's just artistically, it's. I find it to be stunning to look at. Honest to God, I feel like you could pause this movie at any moment.
Yeah. And
you have a beautiful, interesting image.
That's the kind of movie that Kubrick is known for doing. It's one way of filmmaking, and he is a master at that kind of filmmaking. He really is. Sometimes his movies lack in the story department, are incredibly boring, but the spectacle can either overcome that, or it can just exist despite that. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Haven't seen it. Again,
not a lot going on in that movie, but like the whole point is just to take in the spectacle of it all, and the futurism about it. It's almost like a religious experience, like a ceremony, like you're just forced to contemplate your place in the universe just because you're wallowing in these images, The story would take away from that.
Well, and think about how integral the score is to that movie, too.
Yeah, story would take away from that. And I'm a huge fan, by the way, of Eyes Wide Shut. I was the minute I saw it. I felt like I really got that movie, and I really liked it. Interested to see how in that documentary they kind of talked about this movie being like an Eyes Wide Shut, or Eyes Wide Shut kind of being a counterpoint to this movie in the way it dealt with family issues and stuff like that. I mean, Kubrick. But anyway, The Shining and Shelly Duvall. I knew this was going to happen.
Oh my God.
I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah. Oh. But that's okay, because I think people either have... that was going to be a really deep thought by me. People either have seen this movie or they haven't.
Write that down.
Probably one or the other. But my point is, this is an iconic movie. I don't think that we would be doing anybody any kind of service if we went through it scene by scene. But what I love about it, one of the many, many things that I love about it, is that at its core, it's about a family, and this dad, regardless if you want to look at it, from the book's point of view that he's struggling with alcoholism, or you want to look at it from the movie's point of view that he's just kind of crazy. And honestly, the movie makes him feel more egocentric.
Yeah.
It's just all about him, and he feels sorry for himself, and I don't find that endearing.
Yeah.
The dad is not an endearing character. But the mom, Wendy, who's trying to keep everything together, and Danny, this little boy, and he's so fascinating. Just the shots of him, and I have no idea what Kubrick's direction was. I don't know what he was saying to Danny Lloyd in these shots, but there are just so many shots of him that are just extreme close-ups on his face. His face just right square in the middle of the frame, staring, looking terrified, sometimes drooling. But even not in those scenes, even in the mediocre family type scenes, I just found him compelling. There's a scene in the very beginning of the movie where Wendy and Danny are sitting at the breakfast table together, and Danny is just eating and watching TV very nonchalantly, and Shelley Duvall is just sitting there smoking a cigarette nonchalantly. By the way, I think that Shelley Duvall's cigarette ash should have been credited in the...
You put on the performance of a lifetime there.
I couldn't stop looking at it. But what I'm trying to get at is, like, I'm just looking at them and I feel like I'm looking at real people. It doesn't feel performative.
Right.
I think that those two actors, Shelley Duvall and Danny Lloyd, have a lot to do, and Jack Nicholson, because none of them look like movie stars. These do not look like glamorous red carpet people.
True.
These look like people that you would know in real life, and who knows what's going on behind closed doors with them. And then the problems that they're dealing with apart from the supernatural part of the hotel are very real human experiences. And I find it really difficult to sympathize with Jack. I think we're supposed to, somehow. And I think that in the book, you do sympathize with him more. But in the movie especially, to me, he comes across as very, very selfish. Yeah. It drives me crazy when he disparages his wife, which he does often. At one point, he calls her a sperm bank, which I didn't even remember, and that totally grossed me out.
I didn't remember that either. That was disgusting.
Meanwhile, he has been hired as the caretaker for this hotel. And if we are to believe what we are shown in the movie, he's doing nothing.
Yeah, she's doing it all. She's checking the boilers downstairs. She's doing the cooking and everything that's supposed to be done.
Talking to the rangers on the radio. Right. And meanwhile, he's sleeping.
I can get this because she is a loving and supportive wife. And the whole reason for them to come out here is so that he can be in isolation to get his book done and they can make some money doing it. And so she just comes across as that much more sympathetic and endearing and loving, because of it.
Yeah, she's supporting him in his endeavor, right?
Yes, exactly. And one thing that struck me, I thought pretty much the only thing I could talk about this movie is, what struck me now? What did I not notice before? And one of the things that struck me is the contrast. When they start out, Jack Nicholson is all gung-ho about the place and just kind of looking at it as a place to be and to do his thing, but he still comes across as creepy. Shelley Duvall, you would think in a movie like this, that she would be creeped out by the place in the beginning, and then it would kind of move from there. But actually, her character, Wendy, there's a scene very early on where it's like they've been there for a month, I think.
It's really nice up here, isn't it?
I love it. I really do. I've never been this happy or comfortable anywhere.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast you get used to such a big place. I tell you, when we first came up here, I thought it was kind of scary.
I fell in love with it right away. When I came up here for my interview, it was as though I'd been here before.
Mm-hmm. And so she actually comes from a place of very positivity, not apprehension, not anything about this hotel or this place, and comes down from that. And that's a tragedy. She's supporting her husband. She's happy to be there. She's not going through cabin fever in any way, shape, or form. And that all gets torn down later.
Yeah, because everything's falling apart. Her husband is losing his mind and getting progressively aggressive to the point of violence. Now, there is the iconic scene of Shelley Duvall swinging the bat at Jack Nicholson, backing her way up the stairs, which, again, that documentary, there's a very interesting discussion about that. I think they're reading too much into it, but it's interesting nonetheless. It's all about how the whole movie is about the plundering of Native American lands. It's something. There's that scene where she is just absolutely distraught the whole time, and Kubrick made them film it 127 times. I couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs 127 times. I don't know how they were. So there's that. And obviously that tension that's growing between her and her husband, and he's becoming increasingly violent, that's terrible. But also at the same time, there's something wrong with her kid. She doesn't know what it is, but she's scared, and they are basically trapped there. There was one scene that I don't think that I've ever paid any attention to before, but there's one scene where Shelley Duvall just paces back and forth in their living quarters.
Yes.
And she's just talking to herself, trying to assure herself that it will be okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I've ever paid any attention to that scene before, but because we were watching it specifically for her, I paid notice. And I thought, this woman is going through it.
Can you imagine, like, doing that and then, okay, cut. Oh, it looks like it's lunchtime, and all right, and then coming back to it after lunch. The places she had to go and maintain, especially for the lunatic director like Stanley Kubrick, the woman needs like a medal for that. Definitely not a Razzie. I can't believe they got Razzies when this movie came out.
I can't either. The critics didn't like it, and I don't understand that because, of course, like you, I'm not old enough to have seen this in the theaters, but I can only imagine having never seen it and seeing it on the big screen. I think I would have walked out slack-jawed. Like,
yeah,
holy shit, that was a good movie.
I would have too.
I can't believe that it wasn't well received. In the wake of the criticism of Dr. Phil exploiting Shelley Duvall and her mental health on national television, the Razzies, the board of the Razzies, rescinded her nomination. They said, in light of finding out what that process was like, we take it back.
That's nice of you.
Well, I mean, it's a little PC, but I mean, it's deserved.
I don't know. I mean, I get the Razzies is supposed to be like a tongue-in-cheek kind of like, can we all laugh at ourselves thing, but I also feel like it's kind of mean-spirited to just...
It is a little mean-spirited.
To bash people for... I don't care. I don't care if you were a horrible actor in a movie. You did it. You put yourself out there. Like,
people are just doing their jobs.
Have some sympathy for people who put themselves out there and try hard at something. And if they fail in front of you, or it's not as well received as it is, like, let's just give them a pat on the back anyway. Let's not create an award for how bad you were.
Well, especially in something like this, and I mean, it's not fair to like establish some kind of hierarchy about like the quality of films or whatever. But these people were clearly making an effort to do something. It's not like they were just slapping some shit together and being lazy about it.
Right. We've seen a lot of that.
You can tell that. Yeah, and you can tell that just by looking at it. I can't imagine watching this film and thinking Shelley Duvall is a bad actress. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
She's heartbreaking to watch on screen. Yeah, she's a little strange. She's gawky and awkward, and I think that some people, maybe Stephen King included, didn't think that she was attractive. Like, that's an important thing. She's not a starlet. She doesn't look like a starlet, but I don't think I would have liked the movie if she did look like a starlet. I don't want her to be gorgeous. I want her to be real.
Yeah.
And she brings the realness.
I agree with you on that. Now, Stephen King did put up a criticism, which I think is fair, that he said that he thinks that the Stanley Kubrick put the most misogynistic character up on the screen because
I think it's
he
fair.
says all she's there to do is scream and wail and be a victim. But I don't know.
It's not true.
I don't think it's true. She does everything in her power.
She's terrified for so much of it, but at the same time, she's always trying.
She's proactive enough.
And seeing her defending herself against a man who has clearly lost his mind. But I also find it so compelling because she still loves him. I think that that's such a interesting dynamic to show. She doesn't want to hit him over the head with a bat and knock him out. She has to.
Stay away from me.
Why?
I just want to go back to my room.
Why?
I'm very confused. I just need a chance to think things over.
You've had your whole fucking life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
Stay away from me. Please. Don't hurt me.
not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me!
Wendy,
Stay away!
darling, light of my life, I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the f*** in.
Stay away from me! Don't hurt me!
I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me! Stay away!
Oh gosh, it blows me away with the acting in that scene, and then the way that the next scene is shot, where she is dragging him to the pantry where she can lock him up.
Yeah.
The camera just traces on him, kind of starting to come back to consciousness.
You're like, oh shit,
but
oh
you
shit.
know that she is dragging him, and you can hear her weeping.
Yeah. She doesn't want to do it. She takes no joy in this.
Yeah, she's terrified.
And she doesn't turn around and allow herself to get tricked by him. A lesser movie, one of these dumb movies would do that. Oh, honey, I need to go to the hospital. I think I really hurt my head. Oh, you did? Oh, well, then I'll open the door. No, this doesn't go there either. She's smart. I've got a question for you. Do you think there are ghosts at the hotel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely supernatural.
I think...
Not all in Jack's mind.
Yeah, the hotel is haunted.
Okay, yeah. I think so, too.
I do think if there was one scene that they could have cut, and I'm not even saying I don't like it, it just felt different than the rest of the movie. I think they could have cut that scene where Wendy sees all of the skeletons.
Oh, God, that was so corny. I forgot that was in there.
All of a sudden, it kind of becomes like a Halloween haunted house.
I know. As soon as I saw that, I was like, I forgot this was in this movie, but this, takes it down 5 notches.
I think that her performance in that scene is fantastic. She's running around and we see what she's seeing, but we also see her, and I see terror in her face.
Sure.
I believe that she is terrified, but the scene itself,
What was the point of that?
it just didn't seem to fit it. It felt like we were in a different movie all of a sudden.
It suddenly felt cheap, and I don't even understand what the point of that was. The house is dead. One last thing to frighten her into fainting or something like that? I don't know.
I like the other stuff. The other stuff that she sees, like the not skeletons, like her seeing the There's so many things we didn't talk about, but her seeing the ghost of the previous caretaker, Grady, blowing a guy in a dog costume.
Wow, that still puzzles me. I don't understand the dog costume thing.
It's explained more in the book. There's so much backstory.
Oh, I forgot
I
about
say
that,
like you haven't read it. I know you've read it.
Yeah, it's been ages. I was in high school when I read it, yeah.
Me too. But there is a lot more backstory. There's a lot of backstory of the hotel.
Well, it's a Stephen King book, of course there is.
That guy,
sure.
that guy Grady, was the caretaker who killed his wife and his 2 little girls, who are you see many times in the movie. It's iconic. We didn't talk about them at all, but if you've heard of The Shining, you've seen those little girls. He was having a homosexual affair with some guy, and the guy was at a costume party or something. Like, it's there, and that's the thing. Like, that image is shocking, and I feel like that's kind of a controversial, but also at the same time kind of iconic image, because he's shot through a door frame.
Yeah.
So many people are shot through door frames, but you can't really tell what's happening. You can kind of tell that one guy is kneeling, but then he gets up. Well, he doesn't get up, but he
Sits up.
becomes vertical on his knees, and the other guy comes into the frame of the door frame too. And at that point, you're like, oh, I see what's happening there.
And then we move on.
Creepy, right? And just move on, and that's creepy and spooky. I love the hedge maze, even though it's not in the book at all.
It's great.
In the book, it's topiaries. It is intricately manicured topiaries, shrubs shaped like animals in a park on the property.
That move.
Danny goes and he's playing in the park. He all of a sudden has the sense that whenever he's not looking, the topiaries are moving.
Yeah.
And it's true. One of them in particular, I think, is a lion. And every time he looks away and looks back, then it gets closer and closer. And that part, I remember reading that part of the book, and it sounds stupid, me saying it out loud. And that's probably, I'm sure, why Kubrick didn't film it either. Like, how do we make this not silly.
Right.
But reading it, it was terrifying. I was terrified.
I remember the topiaries being a very real and present threat in the book. At one point, I think they're also like kind of all gathered up and blocking away or something. I can't remember exactly, but
I think at one point he's in the park and he crawls into like one of those big cement tubes play. And the topiaries are just like menacing out. I don't remember explicitly, like you said, it's been probably 30 years since I read it, but I do remember feeling fear in those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But the hedge maze is great. Another big change from the movie. We didn't talk much about Scatman Crothers. He's great. He plays Halloran. He's more integral in the book. In the movie, he meets Danny and he can tell that Danny shines, which is this like
psychic
telepathy or ESP psychic stuff or whatever. It can read minds and things. He can tell right away, and so he talks to him about it, and basically, you know, Danny didn't know what was going on. And he's like, yeah, some people can do it. It's just a thing that some people can do. But in the book, he tells him, just like in the movie, he tells him there's nothing to be scared of here. Just think of it like pictures in a book. It's fine.
Yes.
But then he says, but if anything bad happens, you shine out to me as hard as you can, and I'll come back. In the book, Danny's shine is so strong that when he does panic and calls out to Dick, he nearly kills him. like it hits him so hard that he almost dies. But in the movie, he comes back. But I think it's a great movie. I don't want to point out a lot of flaws, but it felt unnecessary in the movie for them to bring Dick back just for him to be instantly killed. It's bothered me.
I don't know. I like that. It's a shocker. A number of horror movies have done that. We've kind of praised that in a way that here's this expectation that this white knight is going to come in and save them. And they take so much time with him and his journey there and building that up that you can't imagine it's going to be all for naught. And yet, boom, it is. He's axed in the chest quite unceremoniously, and he's dead. Doesn't get a word in or anything. And I think that's horror, you know, right there. That's when you realize they are on their own. Nobody's coming to help them. Nobody else is going to be able to drive 5 hours and take a plane and then borrow a snow cat from the guy downstairs and drive another 3.5 hours up the mountain to get to them.
Well, and his arrival saved Wendy. You know, she was in that iconic bathroom scene.
That's true.
And Jack he had almost broken all the way through the door with the axe when they heard the snowcat coming. I love that part too. You know, I feel like we need to wrap up pretty quick, but like that scene in the bathroom is so great. I totally believe that she's terrified. I believe that Danny's terrified. Danny has not even really been in the last half hour of the movie because he has retreated.
Yeah.
into himself, and his imaginary friend Tony, who we've known about from the beginning, who he talks, hello, Mrs. Torrance.
He's taken over.
has taken over. Danny is gone.
Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance.
Come on, Ed. Wake up. You just had a bad dream. Everything's okay.
Danny can't wake up, Mrs. Torrance.
Like, it's so scary. He's terrified. She's still dealing with him. I love the part where she yeets him out a window.
Yeah.
I love that part. Oh, I love that part because her only concern, I mean, they're on like a second or third floor, but it's also there's a blizzard.
Thank God.
And so
right?
the snow has banked up against the building and she can just slide him down. Oh, God. The other big change is, well, Halloran does not die in the book.
In the book.
He and Wendy and Danny escape together. But also in the book, and I don't know, do you think that this ending, I find it very tense and I love it. Danny runs into the maze. I mean, he's running around the maze and his dad is chasing him around with an axe. And his dad at this point is basically, I mean, he's just like, he's not even shouting real words anymore. Like, he's just kind of primally grunting and screaming. And Danny tricks him by backtracking in his footprints in the snow and covering up his footprints. And then Danny's able to, while his dad continues to look for him in the maze, Danny's able to backtrack following his own footprints, and he gets out and he and Wendy drive away together in the snowcat. Then one of the very last things you see is Jack Nicholson frozen to death in the maze, and then it cuts to a picture from the 1920s in the hotel, and he's front and center in it, as though he's always been there the whole time, which I don't really understand.
No.
Doesn't really matter. In the book, for the whole book, from the time they get to the hotel, you are constantly reminded that he has to check the boiler. Like, they can't talk about it enough. He has to manage the boiler.
It's like that thing in Lost, right? They've got to enter that sequence of numbers in every hour on the hour, or something bad's going to happen.
And it's so important. And then in the end, he just, because he's crazy and he's possessed by whatever entity is in the hotel, he forgets about it. And I think Danny and Wendy run out, and he, in his attempt to save the hotel, runs down to where the boiler is, but he's too late and the whole hotel explodes and he dies. But Wendy and Danny get away, and that's the end.
Yeah.
I've not read anything about why Kubrick changed the end. I don't know if it was a logistics thing.
Well, I've always felt that ending was rather anticlimactic. Even the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's it?
It's abrupt.
I was glad they got away, but it's super abrupt. I kind of feel like Kubrick was a little out of his element here and didn't really know how to wrap up a horror movie. The stakes are really, really, really high. He chases him into the maze. Danny, who's been in the maze before and is a smart kid and covers up his tracks, gets out. He's stumbling around in there. We see Danny and her get away, and then it's just boom. Morning, Jack Nicholson's frozen, and then pan to the... I was surprised to read that wasn't the original... The ending didn't go completely down like that as originally shot.
I was surprised to read that, too. I was surprised to read that there was a different ending in the original theatrical release.
Yeah, well, what it was is there were just 2 minutes in between. Like, they saw them get out, and then you shoot them in the hospital... And somebody comes back, the guy from the beginning,
the manager or whatever,
hands the ball to Danny. There's some implication there, therefore, that he might have known the hotel was haunted all along, but they're safe and they're in the hospital and yada, yada, yada. And then we go to the photograph. And then apparently... Kubrick sent orders out to all the theaters that they needed to cut out those 2 minutes. So I'm sure a lot of people saw it with that ending on it. Boy, that was a different time.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining it. I think you can find it online.
Probably easy to find.
If I remember correctly, it just feels inconsequential. Like, yeah, cut it. Like, the movie's already 2.5 hours long. Who cares? They got away. Yeah, we don't need to see Wendy in the hospital. Who cares?
I feel like the abruptness of him just freezing to death and that's it. Like, they're gone, they're safe, and that was kind of all that needed to be done is saved a little bit by that puzzle at the end, that he was there all the time. Although I've never understood that.
No. I don't feel like the movie explains it well, because one of the ghosts, supposedly the ghost of the original caretaker, talks to him at some point in the bathroom. Again, a gorgeously shot scene. Mm-hmm. Jack Nicholson's like, "You're the caretaker," and he's like, "No, sir, you're the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker."
Yeah, don't get it.
And the movie doesn't go really any further to explain it. I feel like there is more to it in the book. I feel like...
Is that in the book?
There's a lot more in the book. In the book, Jack becomes obsessed with the hotel.
Yeah.
He becomes obsessed with the history of it. Like, he finds a scrapbook in the cellar. There's a brief glimpse of it next to his typewriter in the movie, but it's a whole thing in the book that he's obsessed with the history of the hotel, and he's obsessed with the different players and people who have, stayed there. And there's a lot of that in the book, like reading backstory about different people that have stayed in the hotel and the odd things that have happened there. That's kind of glossed over here. So that whole "you've always been the caretaker" thing, I don't really get it either. A couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. I know we're already over time, but have you read Dr. Sleep or seen the movie?
I have not. I've been saving that for probably our podcast, but also I'd like to read it first. Or should I? Should I read it first?
You should.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where they're both very good. I very much enjoyed the book, and the movie's a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. But what I was impressed the most by with the movie is that it manages to be a direct sequel to the book and the movie.
Wow.
It lifts certain things from the book that are not mentioned in the movie, but it also lifts things from the movie. In the book, Dr. Sleep, we go with the book ending.
Mm-hmm.
The hotel has burned down. They still have to return to the site for some reason, but the structure itself is burned down. In the film version, like in the film version of The Shining, the hotel has not burned down, and they return to it. But both the book and the movie I enjoyed very much, and I think you would too, and I would encourage you to read the book first, and then when you're done reading the book, I would encourage you to seek out the director's cut. The theatrical cut is good, and that's what I saw first. But then I bought the director's cut or whatever it is on Blu-ray, and it's significantly longer. It's like 3 hours long, and it's better, and it's structured in a better way. So seek out that cut when you look at it. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is, have you seen the movie Ready Player One?
Oh, yeah.
So you have seen that huge Steven Spielberg directed homage to The Shining.
I barely remember it.
Which I love. Within the video game, that this immersive video game that they're playing, they have to go to the Overlook Hotel. And it's all done with CGI, but it is a replica of The Shining. It looks exactly the same. It looks as though these young kids were transported into that world. And they do a really cool thing with the gold ballroom where it's like a whole ballroom of ghosts, like dancing suspended in midair.
That's right.
There's an amazing sequence in the mirror maze where the scary woman from room 237 is like a giant and she's chasing them around with like an axe or something. And
I did forget about that.
So I read Ready Player One, liked the book, thought it was good, was excited about the movie. I thought the movie was way better than the book. There's a whole mystery in the book. Like they're trying to uncover clues, and they figure out that the maker of this game was fascinated by The Shining, and so they go to this whole The Shining thing, and they walk into a movie theater, but then as soon as they walk into the movie theater, they are in that lobby of The Shining, and the score and I was absolutely giddy in that moment. So I'm done. I want to open it up to whatever your last thoughts are, the things that you want to talk about, even though, again, as we said from the beginning, there are so many things that we didn't talk about. We barely touched on the plot. There are so many other interesting things that are going on in this movie. There's just not the time.
Yeah.
Any last things you wanted to talk about?
Like I said earlier, when we started this out, I tried to look at this with fresh eyes and without the idea that I absolutely had to gush over this movie or else, people would criticize me. But I just can't help but gush over this movie. So good. It didn't have to turn out as good as it did. Just like a lot of Kubrick's films were not initially appreciated as much as they are in retrospect. Again, I think Eyes Wide Shut is appreciated much better in retrospect. That was his final film than it was when it came out, and I loved it when it came out.
He was working on something else when he passed, wasn't he? And didn't Steven Spielberg take it over?
AI was the movie, yeah. Then Steven Spielberg took it, and
they were friends.
Yeah, they were friends. And everybody thought, Steven Spielberg's the guy. If anybody's going to do Stanley Kubrick right, it's going to be Steven Spielberg. But having watched that movie, it's too Spielberg. I just don't feel like Kubrick would have made it such a pat and charming movie that it kind of ended up being.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, but this, it's fine. But yeah, I don't mythologize Kubrick like a lot of people do. I think that his movies are unique. I would love A Clockwork Orange, but it's highly disturbing. I also feel like that movie gets a little long in parts. It's not necessarily as tight and concise as I think it ought to be.
That's a hard one to watch.
It's hard to watch.
I think it's brilliant, but it's hard to watch.
But it says something, and I love an artist who's got stuff to say. But I enjoy this movie just as much, if not more, sitting down and watching this all the way through for the first time in I don't know how long, especially with those headphones in. You were not wrong to suggest, please, people, get a great sound system. If you don't have a great sound system at home, like put in some headphones and just absorb this movie the way it was meant to be watched. It is still just as gorgeous, still just as effective, still just as brilliantly acted by Jack Nicholson and Shelly Duvall, and still just hauntingly gorgeous as far as the score goes.
Yeah, Shelly Duvall. When people pass away, especially people who were in some way prominent in our consciousness growing up, we do these tributes. And the reason that we do them is because we like these people. And this is one of those times when I got up in the morning and I made my coffee or whatever, and then I sat down and I pulled up TMZ, and Shelly Duvall dead at she was in her late 60s, I think.
75, actually. 75.
75. Good for her. I was sad. I like her. I remember her primarily from this, but I also vividly remember her children's shows.
Fairy Tale Theater.
Hi, I'm Shelly Duvall.
We had those.
And this is Fairy Tale Theater.
I guess people have rediscovered that, and it's popular on TikTok now. I don't know. I just read that. But we watched Fairy Tale Theater all the time. For some reason, I don't know if we recorded it off a TV or something we rented or what, but there were several of those episodes that were in our heavy rotation as a kid. And I think I've talked about one of them before, The Boy Who Left Home to Find Out About the Shivers, with Christopher Lee in it. What a great series.
Well, yeah, she produced, I think, 5 or 6 series for Showtime, all of them featuring like huge stars in these retellings of fairy tales and scary stories and all kinds of things. Thinking about her now, she just seems like such a cool person. Like, how lucky you would have been to know her and to be her friend. I'm very skeptical. She made a movie in 2023 and it starred her and Edward Furlong, who doesn't seem to be doing very well. I think that they were cast, on their names. It was a small independent film. And I really don't know a whole lot about it. The only thing that I know about it is that she was cast in a cameo, but then when they brought her out to film, she was interested in expanding her role, so they expanded her role. And it got a limited release, and the people who made it are still trying to get a wider release for it. I don't know. And what I read was that she was excited about getting back into it because she hadn't done a film in like 20 some years. And she was excited about getting back into it. And she said, Jessica Tandy won an Oscar in her 80s. Maybe I can too. I certainly don't think that that's going to happen based on whatever that 2023 movie was. But if she had a good time and if she enjoyed getting back to the work that she did, I'm happy for her. I'm a big fan. I'm sad that she's gone, but as I almost always say, what an amazing legacy. I think she's got 4 or 5 films in the National Film Registry.
Oh, yeah. This woman who was plucked out of obscurity. Crazy, right?
And I'll always remember her fondly. And so that's why, although I'm sad she's gone, I'm glad that we had the opportunity to say nice things about her because she seemed like a really cool lady.
Totally agree. Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend or one of your fellow Shelly Duvall fans.
Yeah.
You can find us online just by Googling 2 Guys in a Chainsaw Podcast. Leave us a note on our website. Leave us a review. Patreon.com/Chainsaw Podcast. If you go there, you will find lots of goodies that we have for our behind-the-scenes folks. Mini reviews, the unedited versions of our phone calls. Believe it or not, they get longer than this.
Oh, boy.
So if you're interested in hearing us blabber around for another 10, 15, 20 minutes every week, you can certainly get the inside scoop there, along with a Christopher Pike Book Club I've been talking about forever, mini-sodes, and exclusive interview. We'd love to see you back there. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With 2 Guys and a Chainsaw.